Fellow Falcoholics, what is up? Welcome to episode 313 of the Falcoholic Live. The Falcons offseason is underway, and the Falcons, of course, if you missed the last show, have parted ways with defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake. I think we all figured that was coming, but now the team is looking for a new defensive coordinator and has 4 people already confirmed to be on the interview list. Probably hear about several more over the coming days, but we're going to break it all down. We're going to get into the potential candidates, who we want, who we think they'll hire, who they probably should hire, and of course get to some of those burning off-season questions I know some of you have. Everyone wants to talk about Kirk Cousins. We'll talk about him. Kyle Pitts has been a topic as of late. We'll talk about him. We'll get into all that stuff, and to help me do so, I have my co-host, of course, Adnan Ikic at Say Which Way. Adnan, welcome back to the program. How are you doing on this fine Wednesday?
Well, I'm doing good. You know what? The Falcons season is over. I don't have to look forward to any more Sunday disappointments. Now all of my happiness resides in the Atlanta Hawks,
Yep.
who
Well,
don't have
hey,
their roster tonight. So, we'll figure it out.
we'll figure it out. But I'm glad the Hawks can give you at least some kind of refuge from the struggles of the Falcons, because I'm sure
Allegedly.
everyone allegedly, yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah. So
Allegedly.
we'll see how that goes. Also joining us, we have Aaron Freeman. He's at Locked On Falcons on the Twitters. Aaron, welcome back. How are you doing now that we are a few weeks removed from another disappointing Falcons season?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. The week after the season ended, I vented a lot of frustrations about the direction of the team. I'm sure I'll vent some more frustrations on today. But I'm doing good. I'm getting past it. The disappointing ending of the season. The disappointing sort of future for this team heading into next year. But maybe things are on the up and up, and with that D coordinator hire and whatnot, and maybe that will reinvigorate me to be excited about the Atlanta Falcons again.
Maybe it does. I think a lot depends on this hire, and we were talking about it before the show. I think that it's really, I think who Raheem Morris hires here, which direction they decide to go with this, probably will tell us a lot about the trajectory of this team and what we should expect next year. And we'll see, obviously, if that pans out the way we fear it will, or perhaps the team will make an unexpected hire and kind of reinvigorate the fan base. But we're going to get into all that and more tonight, guys. Thanks for joining us once again. Before we do, want to get you, of course, a word from our sponsor, BetOnline. Folks, BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in the year 2025. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, college basketball, the final CFP games, NHL, UFC. BetOnline is the number one sports betting source for the new year, from touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks. BetOnline's got you covered on every game, every play, and every win. Just make sure when you sign up to use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for the latest promotions. And make sure, again, to use that promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, when you sign up for those latest promotions. BetOnline, the game starts here. And we do have a new ad that I'm still getting the exact details of, but I'll go ahead and shout them out. We are now partnered with Underdog Fantasy, which has also taken on the Heed the Call pod, which, for those of you that remember the Around the NFL podcast, got shut down unceremoniously. Underdog picked it up, so super excited to be sponsored by Underdog because Heed the Call. I don't know. I think it's the best football podcast. You guys tell me what you think. But if you aren't familiar with Underdog Fantasy, Underdog offers a unique approach to fantasy sports with a simple pick'em style format. You can select players you believe will outperform expectations without the complexities of traditional DFS. There's a user-friendly interface and a growing community that make it easy and fun to play. I will have a lineup selected. I'm going to probably publish it on Friday's show. We just got the brief today, so I don't have my stuff picked out, but probably going to be doing a lot of props for the Ravens-Bills game because I think that one's the spiciest. But you guys can go check it out now, and if you do sign up, we've got a special promo code for you here. The promo code is BIRDS, BIRDS, like dirty birds and brews. There's also a link which will get you that code as well in the show description, and you will get a free pick and up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you sign up using the code BIRDS. So definitely check that out. And again, check back on Friday's episode, which will probably be a mock draft, by the way. I will have my picks, and I'd love to hear what kind of picks you guys are going on and doing as well. Excited to get into that. It's very similar in some ways to like Prize Picks and some other ones, but I think Underdog's got a couple of wrinkles in there that make it very interesting. So excited to dive into that. Now back to the Falcons, a much more somber topic now. But the DC search is underway. After the firing, which was kind of just like randomly on a Saturday, interesting timing. The Falcons, of course, let go of Jimmy Lake. I think Adnan and I talked about it a bit. Or no, I guess we didn't. I didn't even done a show. Were you there for that show, Adnan? I don't think you
I
were.
wasn't there for the
I haven't
Jimmy
gotten
Lake.
anybody's take on this. All right, so we're gonna get some thoughts on that real quick before we move on to the new candidates. But I remember we talked about it kind of before, like the coach that we expected to get let go if one did get let go. Adnan was probably going to be Jimmy Lake. Were you surprised that they actually did go through with the move?
Not really. Not surprised just because of the ramifications had they kept him, because it sort of feels like this was such a disappointing season for all involved, to the point where even though Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot are still around as the acting general manager and head coach of the Falcons, another season like that next year kind of feels like it would really warm their seat up a lot, if not yank them right out of that chair. So I think it did feel like, all right, someone has to go down for the season that we just had, and then we can't really have a repeat of that season, on the defensive side. On the offensive side was actually pretty fine. They were a top 10 offense, but the defense is what tanked the season for the most part. There were those reports that Raheem Morris had taken over more after the bye week, and I feel like at that point, that was just planting the seeds of, all right, there's probably going to be, some restructuring. And it just felt like, even though Raheem Morris really likes Jimmy Lake, probably, personally, it felt like a professional decision of, you can't really afford to go into next season with Jimmy Lake there, sort of looking like he was in over his head a little bit, as we saw last year. And if that sort of happens again, then way more people would be at risk of losing their jobs than just a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think it was not shocking. I think there were clear issues with the defense that we picked up earlier in the year, and then we did see some changes after the bye, but again, it's hard to say like what exactly was Jimmy Lake changing, or was it Raheem stepping in and being like, hey, you got to do something different here, or whatever. I mean, that's kind of stuff we probably won't get a lot of details on. Maybe over time we will, but yeah, not surprised that it happened. Aaron, what about you? What did you think of the decision to part ways with Jimmy Lake?
No, I don't think it was surprising in the sense that the Falcons moved on from Jimmy Lake. I was a little surprised when they did it, because when we got to Thursday and Friday and nothing had been done, I'm like, oh, okay, they're going to keep Jimmy Lake. And then on Saturday, when everybody's days off, they're like, oh, we're going to make this move. And like, all right, I guess I got to do work today, But like, yeah, so I was surprised at the timing of the move to sort of delay it that many days, and it sort of took them 4 or 5 days to kind of figure it out if they were going to move on from that. That felt like a Wednesday move as opposed to a Saturday move. But despite the timing, I don't think it was a shocker. I really do think that week 18 game really kind of put the nail in the coffin for Jimmy Lake, where it's like you could convince yourself that despite a couple of hiccups in those 5 previous games after the bye, that you could still say like, okay, things are trending in the right direction for this Falcons defense. They're getting pressure, and as long as they're not dealing with Jordan Addison, their secondary is doing okay. And so like you could convince yourself that, year one of play caller will build off of this in year 2. And then it just kind of, the bottom fell out in that week 18 game. And I think a lot of it had to do with a very passive game plan, just kind of a regression to what they were doing pre-bye, which was much more of a passive sort of sit back and let the offense kind of dictate what they wanted to do. And I think a lot of that, like their game plan for Bryce Young, I thought was very similar to the game plan against Desmond Ridder in that Raiders offense. And like, I can understand why you don't fear Desmond Ridder based off of what he's done, but based off of how Bryce Young had been playing in the previous month, like I think the Falcons kind of underestimated Bryce Young, and they paid for it on that Sunday, giving up 44 points in overtime. So I feel like that game was kind of like, oh, we can't keep doing this, and so something has to change, and that led to the decision ultimately.
Yeah, I agree, and I was really thankful actually that I like chose not to be like available to watch this game live, because I'm sure I would have absolutely raged, because even like watching it like after the fact, like knowing what was going to happen, it was pretty rage inducing, particularly when like the offense is kind of just like out there balling. Like, I mean, Michael Penix is doing everything you want him to do. You have, the QB school doing a breakdown where he describes like 5 of Penix's throws as world-class quarterbacking, and the Falcons lose the game to the Panthers of all teams. It's like, I'm sure I would have, gotten banned from X or something for if I was watching that game live. But it's like, it's just kind of infuriating to see that. And we know the defense had its limitations, but the defense performed far better against better opponents throughout the year. So it's just kind of a shocker. And I agree. I think that it looked like they had just kind of went back to a scheme that I thought we had gotten past, and it just didn't work. That the whole defensive strategy didn't work. And like, I was already on, sort of record as like, I just didn't like that style of defense. I've always been a big aggressive defense guy. So like, there's definitely some candidates out of this group that we're interviewing that I prefer, because I just prefer that style of defense. But it's not to say that what Jimmy Lake is running or was running here and that sort of style of defense can't work in the NFL, but it certainly wasn't working for Atlanta. And it was just far too predictable. And there were a number of problems that just didn't seem to get fixed. So it did feel like they kind of had to move on if they wanted any chance of like improving this unit. But they're in a tough spot because, it's something that seemed to provoke a lot of like backlash from Falcons fans when I was like, Robert Saleh is not gonna take this job. Like, I mean, people are like, oh, why not? It's as good of a job with the 49ers. It's not. It's not. I mean, I don't know I don't know. The 49ers were ravaged by injuries this year, absolutely decimated. And that was still a better defense than Atlanta's. And like, that team is got the prestige. You've got the previous relationship with the head coach there. Like, the 49ers could be right back to competing for Super Bowls next year. The Falcons would need a lot of things to go right to be in that conversation. So I don't really get anyone who thinks that this is even remotely competitive with the 49ers job. It's not a terrible job. It's just not a coveted one. I mean, like, and I don't know if people took that as like, this job sucks. It's just like, no, I think the top candidates are not going to take it because they have better options. As I say that, Ben Johnson apparently is considering the Raiders job. So maybe anything can happen, I guess. Miracles can happen to anyone sometimes. But I think that the change was necessary. And I do think that the Falcons have some potential good candidates here. So let's get into that a little bit. Aaron, I'm curious. We have 4 names so far. I'm sure those aren't the only 4 we're going to hear. What do you think? I mean, let's start with Jeff Ulbrich, right? Because I think we all agree that Jeff Ulbrich's probably the most likely person to get the job at this point. Like, it just seems like it feels very inevitable and not in a good way.
Yeah. I would guess, I don't know if the various sports books that sponsor all these podcasts have odds for who the Falcons' next defensive coordinator is, but I would guess that on all of them, Jeff Ulbrich would have the best odds at this point in time, given the previous working relationship, given the closeness that both of those guys have. Got a chance to speak with Jeff Ulbrich at the Senior Bowl last year about Raheem after he got the job, and he was very, very positive and praising of Raheem and talking about him as a, not just a good coach, but an outstanding human being. So they have a great working relationship. I am not the world's biggest fan of Jeff Ulbrich. I'll be honest with you. Like, I didn't really love the work that he did here in Atlanta previously as a linebackers coach. I didn't really feel like guys like Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell and Duke Riley really developed under him. Foye Oluokun did, but I feel like that's more a Foye Oluokun thing. As you see him continue to go strong in the NFL, though Deion Jones, he made a play in the playoffs. It's like, oh,
he
Deion
did.
Jones,
He's still playing in the playoffs. Yeah,
he's still out there.
can't
All
talk
right, he's
shit.
posted
Yeah.
himself.
Worse
You know,
than
Duke Riley's
playoffs
out there
ball.
covering punts for the Dolphins or some team out there somewhere. You know, Devondre Campbell took his ball, went home in San
I
Francisco
feel like
this year.
Devondre Campbell is good enough to be playing somewhere. He just doesn't want to. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So, you know, it's not like those guys all sucked or anything. Like, I just didn't see the growth and development over time for most of those guys that I wanted to see that would signal to me that, you know, they were being well coached. And then, like, on top of that, like, you know, you talk about Robert Saleh, and Jeff Ulbrich obviously was very successful as a D coordinator in New York, but I don't really think that scheme works well for the Falcons, because I look at the Jets this year, and, you know, the previous years they were very successful defensively, and then they took a step back this year. And I think it wasn't anything to do with like, oh, they fired Robert Saleh or anything. I just think like that scheme is so predicated on being able to dominate the line of scrimmage that they went from basically one of the 3 to 5 best D lines to like maybe the 12th best D line in the NFL, which would be an incredible thing for the Falcons to have. You know, that would be a massive upgrade for the Falcons. But you kind of saw that defense not really work if their D line isn't doing all the things, because basically that scheme in a lot of ways is very similar to what the Falcons defense was under Dan Quinn, which really relied on the defense, the defensive front to sort of win rushing with 4, and then you have Sauce Gardner locking down one side of the field. And so it was like, it's kind of a souped up version of what you saw with the Falcons defense in their best in those 2016 and 2017 years. And so like, I don't think the Falcons realistically can build that type of D line in a short period of time. Now, if they had a longer runway, and like we had 3 years of like oh, well, we're rebuilding and we're building this thing, I think you would have, I would be much more open to either one of those guys, Saleh or Ulbrich. So for me, like I'm just like, if they're the hire, they're the hire, or you know, Ulbrich specifically. If he's the hire, he's a hire. But like, I don't think that's going to really, for me personally, really get me like excited about like, oh man, look what, you know, those top 10 defenses he had with the Jets. We're going to be that in Atlanta. And I'm like, I don't really think so. But you know, I hope I'm wrong on that. So Ulbrich is interesting. He's probably the front runner, but like that one for me personally is not going to move the needle maybe as much as it will for other people.
Yeah, I don't like that one. Not necessarily because I dislike Ulbrich necessarily. I mean, I think he hasn't necessarily like proven much as a defensive coordinator. Doesn't mean he can't do it. Doesn't mean he can't be a good DC. It's just, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, well, the Jets got worse when Robert Saleh left. Well, if you think Robert Saleh is a good coach, of course they're going to get worse when he leaves. I mean, I don't know how you can think Robert Saleh is a great coach and then be like shocked when he leaves and Ulbrich has to take over running the team as well as the defense if the defense got worse. Big shock there. So I'm not holding that against Ulbrich necessarily. It's just, he doesn't wow me, and I think the Ulbrich hire would really suggest that we're just going back to the well with guys that we know, and again, most of the time coaches are going to hire people they know for most jobs, and they should. Like you need a lot of people that you know you can work with, that you trust and their abilities and stuff like that. But you got to hire some people, like at least usually I think at least one coordinator, right? Somebody that you're not friends with or like close with or whatever. Somebody you need some kind of outside voice to be able to keep you on track when things aren't going right. And you know, that's why I definitely favor the other 3 names that the Falcons are looking into, just from that perspective. But you know, I think Ulbrich would kind of signal that we're not really willing to make significant change, because I imagine Ulbrich will come in and run something fairly similar. And I agree also with what you said schematically, Aaron. Like, I just don't think that type of defense is going to work here. The Falcons need as much smoke and mirrors as possible, because they're gonna have to like get these guys playing above their talent level, because again, we just don't have the resources to really invest heavily in the defense this year. So we're going to need to do some kind of razzle dazzle to try to make this better than it is, or they're probably going to be doomed to like mid to low 20s defense. But yeah, Adnan, what do you think about Ulbrich, and how would you sort of take it if the front runner is the eventual hire?
I mean, I wouldn't be shocked at all if they hired Ulbrich. I think Aaron's right on the money that he should probably be the betting favorite, if people are betting on that. But let's be honest, people are fucking betting on everything these days. Um, but yeah, it would be sort of uninspiring, to say the least. It would, I don't know. It kind of feels like Raheem Morris just came. This is gonna sound patronizing, and it's gonna sound. I don't mean for it to sound patronizing because I'm not saying that Jeff Ulbrich isn't a qualified defensive coordinator, but it would kind of feel like Raheem Morris came. He hired, his very good friend Jimmy Lake, and then in firing Jimmy Lake, he's hiring his other very good friend Jeff Ulbrich, and it would probably signal a lot of similarities to what we just saw, with the Falcons defensively this past year, with what we saw with the Falcons defensively last time Raheem Morris was here in the interim head coaching role, where I think Jeff Ulbrich did. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he was promoted up to defensive coordinator that year from linebackers coach after Dan Quinn was fired.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, none of that really strikes too much confidence. And yeah, I would definitely much rather look elsewhere in this pool of four candidates, plus whoever else they're gonna interview, because there will be plenty more interviews leaking out in the coming days and weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely hear about a lot more. But yeah, I think we all kind of feel the same way that that one would probably be a disappointment relative to what the Falcons could get. And I do think like some of these other candidates, guys like coming off a down year like Lou Anarumo, guys trying to get back into the NFL like Wayne Martindale, same thing with Steve Wilkes, who kind of had an unceremonious exit from the 49ers and kind of took a year off. Like, I think these are realistic candidates the Falcons absolutely could get. Kind of these hungry guys looking for another shot. But yeah, Jeff Ulbrich to me would be kind of a little too comfortable. Don't really love that one. And we got Alex Foster with the $5 super chat, 20th super chat for Alex. Thank you so much, Alex. Appreciate your support, man. It says, around the time people were calling for Lake's firing, Kevin went away on vacation. Are we sure he's not secretly interviewing? Keep up the great work, guys. I hope to God they don't interview me to do it, because like I've never called defensive plays before. So if they hired me to do it, I would probably go and take, most of my salary and hire someone capable to do the job, and I would just, maybe get the credit or something. But
Kevin is talking about offshoring the defensive
yeah, I would have to ghost rate the defensive coordinating with a coach that actually does, because I respect the Falcons too much to put you guys through a season of me just like, ask maddening how to call plays. I'd probably just be like, all right, let's engage 8, let's go. Every time. You guys know I love aggressive defense. No, I'm just kidding. I don't ever use engage 8, or do I?
That was my go-to. Like when I was a kid in Madden, I didn't know anything about defensive plays. My first ever Madden, I just called engage 8 every single time.
Yeah, how'd that work out for you?
I would control the linebacker and just run through the A gap every single time.
Hey, if you had Caden Ellis, you'd probably be racking up the sacks.
When I played with the Ravens, that was like Madden 7, and I had Ray Lewis, and that was unstoppable in that game.
That actually would work. I think that does make sense. But let's move on to guys that we want, right? It could be, so Adnan, I'll go to you first. It could be someone that they've already interviewed or are planning to interview, or someone they haven't announced yet. But who is the guy that you're hoping ends up as Atlanta's defensive coordinator? Realistically speaking, like, let's not say like, oh, Mike McDonald leaves the Seahawks and comes to it. Like, we can't do that.
If it's realistic, then I'm not going to say Robert Saleh, because I mean, I feel like that's just a really bad secret right now that he's going to end up in San Francisco. There's no way he doesn't end up in San Francisco. I really like Steve Wilkes. I appreciate what he did. I feel like he was a really, really unlucky scapegoat after the Super Bowl for the 49ers. That sort of felt like Kyle Shanahan frustration fire after he lost another Super Bowl, and he just sort of threw Steve Wilkes under the bus in 2023, even though Wilkes' starting linebacker got injured running onto the field in that game, and then sorry, he couldn't stop Pat Mahomes. Nobody can. But yeah, what he did in Carolina as the interim head coach, I feel like he probably should have gotten that head coaching job given what he did with that roster going 6-6 down the stretch in 2022. And it just sort of feels like he's too good to not be a defensive coordinator somewhere. He was too good to not be a defensive coordinator somewhere last year. He did a great job with the Niners, working them up to a top 10 defense in 2024. In 2023, they got to the Super Bowl. The defense was fine in the playoffs, other than some hiccups against the Detroit Lions down the stretch. But I feel like that would be a hell of a hire for the Falcons, and I like Steve Wilkes as a defensive coordinator in general, and I think Atlanta does have a really good opportunity now because, like you said, Kevin, this isn't really the coveted DC job in the NFL, but Wilkes is someone that hasn't been in the league. He was in the league last year, and now this is his chance to really come back in and recreate something with Atlanta.
Yeah, I like Steve Wilkes a lot. I think that was the guy that I had sort of tweeted about, like, oh, I think he'll get an interview. So I think and he just vibes with me. Like we're both really aggressive, and it does seem like for whatever reason he just rubs some coaches the wrong way. Like Carolina seemed like they weren't super excited to give him the job, and then it seemed like maybe I don't know if he got mad at Kyle Shanahan for something or what happened, but it seemed like that kind of crashed and burned quick after that loss in San Francisco. So it seems like he's a guy that ruffles some feathers, which I don't mind. I kind of like that, actually. So that one is interesting to me. But yeah, Aaron, who's the top of your list in terms of guys you think have a realistic shot at winding up in Atlanta?
I would like to see Patrick Graham, the former Raiders DC. I like some of the things I've heard about Patrick Graham. I haven't obviously studied the Raiders defense in depth, but I thought they did some good things in that Week 15 game and from his time in New York. Like, I feel like Patrick Graham is the type of coach that hasn't always been handed the best cards, right? Like, he has Max Crosby, but that's really about it, and again, that's not nothing, right? Clearly it's not nothing, but like, there's not a whole lot else that you look at that Raiders defense and say, man, this is a great unit. And he basically, I would argue, is single-handedly responsible for Antonio Pierce getting that interim head coaching job, because it was really how well they basically had like a top 5, top 10 defense in that latter half of the season after they fired Josh McDaniels, and that was Patrick Graham doing that, not Antonio Pierce. And so, like, I look at him and seeing that work, and then I thought, all those years in New York where he was the DC under Joe Judge, those offenses weren't very good, but it was like the defenses were pretty solid. And, again, he had Dexter Lawrence and a couple other guys on that defense, but it wasn't like you were looking at those Giants defenses and saying, man, this is a loaded roster. And this is the reason why the Giants have halfway decent defenses. So I feel like he's a guy that has been able to, knows how to deal with not necessarily having the best hand and getting the most out of it. He comes from that Patriot school along with Brian Flores, and unlike say a Matt Patricia, like Brian Flores, he's actually one of the handful of Belichick disciples that's actually been semi-successful leaving New England. And I think the other thing that's interesting about Patrick Graham, you talk about aggressive defense. Well, the Raiders led the league in cover zero blitzes this year. Like, I know most people, if I asked you that question, your answer would be Brian Flores as your guess for that answer, but it was actually the Raiders. And so I think you have a coach that has that right blend of aggressiveness, but isn't a psychopath like Wink Martindale is when it comes to that stuff. And you also have a guy that knows how to get the most out of talent. And I think, you see some similarities in terms of what the Falcons are building, to the point where it's like, I think that's some of the issues with some of the potential candidates, like a Robert Saleh or Dennis Allen, where it's just like, does this really, I like those guys as coaches, but do what they like to do on defense really mesh with what the Falcons like to do? And going back to what I said earlier, it's like, again, if the Falcons had a long runway where they could, have multiple off seasons to sort of rebuild this thing, you would feel a lot better about those coaches. But I think in terms of just like a guy that can be sort of an instant adrenaline shot, like Patrick Graham to me checks a lot of those boxes that I think would help for the Falcons move forward.
Yeah, that's not one I had considered at all, and I actually like that. I do think like I would love to get a DC that has that defensive line or linebackers background, just because we have Jerry Gray and it doesn't seem like he's going anywhere, and he's the secondary guru. He's the guy that is doing the passing game, and we trust him to kind of manage the secondary and all that. So I think getting a DC who's like line front seven oriented would make a lot of sense. And I know that Graham definitely has that background, coached D-line and linebackers for quite a while. So yeah, and you're right. Like statistically, he's coordinated, I think, 2 top 10 defenses with like on the Giants and the Raiders, between 2020 to 2024. That's like hard to do, like to squeeze that like top 10 seasons out of those teams when the offenses have been just bad. And squeezing good, the Falcons could use someone like that. I agree. Like that does make a lot of sense to me. Going for someone that's used to kind of making chicken salad out of chicken shit, right? And I think that's a guy in Patrick Graham that seems like he can possibly do that. So I like that idea. That's an interesting one. Yeah, trying to think, because I mean I do like Steve Wilkes. That one's interesting to me. I think Lou Anarumo is also kind of intriguing. Anarumo doesn't have the stats, right? His defenses outside of 1 year really haven't really been all that great. Obviously that 2022 defense was very good, but so that one I think is a little bit sketchier, and he's also someone with the DB background. Like I said, I prefer someone with more of the front seven. Dennis Allen, I think, is somebody that has kind of, I feel like, mixed reviews, right? Because I understand any Falcons fans that don't want anything to do with Dennis Allen because they hate his guts, and I think that's fair. That's fair. But if he was willing to come here to stick it to the Saints twice a year, that would make me like forgive a little bit, right? If he was willing to do that. But I do think like Dennis Allen is a very good coach, very experienced, and certainly isn't from the Morris coaching tree. So again, you bring in some outside perspective, bring in some, just a lot of experience, and Raheem, I think Raheem like really wanted to do the whole like CEO thing, and when he had to like take over the defense from Lake at a certain point, didn't really want to do that. So I think getting someone in here like Dennis Allen would let Raheem do more of his CEO thing. And I also think the nice thing about Dennis Allen is you're probably not too worried about anyone trying to hire him as a head coach, given like what we've seen from Dennis Allen as a head coach. You're not too worried about someone coming in, swooping in, and taking Dennis Allen away from you, in that, and from that angle. I know some people have asked about Ryan Nielsen too. Like, I liked Ryan Nielsen. I thought he did a good job here. Obviously, after what happened to the Jaguars, where that really fell apart in a bad way. I know Furball asked about it. Would you be interested in him coming back? If they did like land on Nielsen coming back, I wouldn't like hate it. I mean, I thought he did a good job with what the Falcons had, and they have most of that still. So you would think that, obviously his scheme towards the end of the year, it seemed like teams kind of figured it out. Falcons started to get gashed pretty bad, but I certainly think he did a pretty good job, and obviously the familiarity would be nice. But I also think that like the split that happened, there's probably something to that, and I kind of have a hard time thinking that they just get back together all of a sudden. Now, if Dennis Allen comes and Nielsen doesn't get any, bites to be a DC again, I would love to have him back as defensive line coach. I think he's an extremely talented D-line coach. I think that would be a home run hire for me to get him back as just like, if he would be willing to do that for a year while he sort of rehabs his image or whatever. You could get Dennis Allen as the DC and then Nielsen as the D-line coach. I think you would be absolutely cooking with that combination. I mean, you guys saw it. Like, the D-line, like, I've never seen the Falcons D-line like grow like that in a season before. Like, usually they just kind of stagnate. So that duo I think would be awesome. But yeah, I also like the ones you guys put forward in terms of like Steve Wilkes and Patrick Graham. I think those guys are up there for me as well. I'm curious, like, Aaron, what do you think about the possibility of like a Wink Martindale? I know you described him as a psychopath, and I would agree with that assessment in terms of his aggressiveness. But I was a little bit surprised that they called him up. He's been out of the NFL for a year. Seems like he's interested in getting back. What would you think about them going in that direction? That'd be kind of a shocker to me.
I mean, look, I'm all for being more aggressive on defense. I feel like Wink takes it about 18 steps a little too far, if you ask me. But like, that would definitely be a very different philosophy. And I know for the Falcon fans that have been pining for the Falcons to use a number one pick on a cornerback, you probably will get your wish because you kind of need to have those, lockdown corners on the back end. To make the Wink Martindale scheme work with all the blitzing that he's going to do. And that's I think a difference between him and Steve Wilkes, and that's why I like Steve Wilkes' style of aggressiveness a little bit more because he tends to play more zone behind it with the fire zone blitzes and whatnot, and Wink is just, we're going to play man coverage. And it was very effective in Baltimore, but you also saw like when they had some injuries in the secondary, that didn't really work. It didn't work quite as effectively with the Giants because they didn't quite have the same talent in the secondary. And so that's my biggest issue with Wink, where it's just like, if you don't basically have the NFL's best secondary, I don't know if his scheme really works all that effectively. And so that would, to me, and I think this is the case with all these defensive coordinator candidates, like really, you get to hire and you understand what the scheme is, but ultimately I think the Falcons' success and failure and whether or not this person is going to improve this defense in 2025 is going to be heavily based off of what sort of investments the Falcons make from a personnel standpoint this offseason, whether that's free agency or the draft, or hopefully both, on that side of the ball. So I think Wink Martindale is very interesting because of his psychopathy, in terms of just being all out blitzing all the time. So he wouldn't be my top choice, but like I can think of worse options for the Falcons at this DC spot as we've kind of discussed before. So he'd probably be right now, like of the four candidates, I'd probably rank him like 3, only ahead of Jeff Ulbrich. But I imagine as we get over the next couple of weeks, we'll probably get another 3 to 5 more candidates. And so I don't know if Wink is going to be climbing up the charts after that point, once we get 6, 7, 8 guys deep or whatever at that point. But he certainly would be a major philosophical shift from where the Falcons defense has been. And I think if you're a Falcon fan and you're saying like, look, the Falcons have been playing a certain style for a long time and it hasn't worked, let's bring in something completely different and new, and maybe it'll work this time. And it's like, okay, like he's going to do some. It's going to be a fun defense if Wink Martindale gets hired. I don't know if it's going to be a good defense, but it will be fun.
I know people were. Oh, sorry, I'm not. I know people looked at his Giants defenses. They did actually get better because the Giants defenses were absolute trash like the year before he got there. But please go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's not just a shift philosophically in game with Wink Martindale. It's also a full 180 from Jimmy Lake, where Lake was someone who had no experience at all as a defensive coordinator at the NFL level, like calling defensive plays. Most of his big experience was at the University of Washington, and I mean, yeah, he was an assistant head coach with the Rams, but that doesn't mean that he was calling plays or anything like that. Whereas Martindale, he is someone who was a defensive coordinator in the league for a long time, and I mean, we see it in the NFL all the time where one guy doesn't work, so the team makes a drastic shift to the guy that's the exact opposite of that archetype of that coach. So I guess that's just something to consider with Martindale, given the fact that he does seem to be the exact 180 from Jimmy Lake coming into the defensive coordinator position with the Falcons last year.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. It would be a huge shift, which is why I'd be really surprised if they do it. But it would. I agree with Aaron's take as well. It would be fun. It would be extremely spicy. And, maybe that would be better than, it would probably be way better than what we watch with this defense most of the time. But yeah, I agree. I think that one's kind of less likely to happen. But yeah, Adnan, anyone that they haven't interviewed yet that you think that they should, or you kind of have out there as sort of like a sleeper guy that fans shouldn't really count out?
Ryan Nielsen is one guy who we've already mentioned that I think, just given the fact that he was here a couple of years ago, the defense was very successful, and it was successful. The Falcons defense was successful. As given the talent, yeah, I'm very confident in saying that. They had 40 sacks for the first time since 2004. I would say Ryan Nielsen is the guy I'd be kind of surprised if they didn't give Nielsen at the very least an interview in these coming days, despite the fact that Jacksonville's defense really sort of, the wheels fell off for them last year. But yeah, I think we'll see Nielsen at least in the building for an interview in the coming days.
Yeah, that would be interesting to me. And Aaron, I know you sort of mentioned one in Patrick Graham. Is there anybody else like that you would have as like a sleeper guy for fans to watch out for?
For me, trying to look at the list I came up with in terms of someone from outside the building, because if Raheem just hires people he knows, like Gus Bradley and Joe Barry and Brandon Staley's on that list, and I would throw those names out there as potential options to interview. Hopefully they're not people that get the job. Matt Eberflus is probably one that I would throw out there as someone who's had some success in this league. The Bears offense has not been great these last couple of years. Their defense has been pretty good despite their offensive issues. So I feel like Matt Eberflus is someone, the former Bears head coach, has basically been a good DC, in Indianapolis, which got him the job in Chicago. And for the most part, and again, I know it's the Bears, they're basically the opposite of the Falcons: terrible offense and good defenses eternally, and the Falcons are just good offenses and terrible defenses eternally. That's why I joke that they're alternate reality Falcons. But yeah, I think he's a guy that I would look at as someone that I would imagine should and could be on the radar.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I hadn't thought of that one either, so that one is very interesting for sure. I think those are a number of names. There'll probably be some ones we didn't mention that just kind of sneak in there. I wonder if they'll interview like Jerry Gray or something like that, like given his experience. But yeah, I do think that it hopefully will be an outside hire, someone to bring a different perspective in here, because I don't think the way they were planning to do it worked super well. So hopefully we'll get something a little bit different in there. Got a couple donos here. Thanks, guys. Oh, I forgot to mention Mark donated $10 kind of before the show aired a couple days ago, but I wanted to shout out Mark for that. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate your donation. Appreciate everyone donating to the Senior Bowl fundraiser. Really appreciate you guys. We got Ray Moon with the 2, says Raheem goofed hard. It's playoffs or bust next season. I agree with that. I think that's not really what Arthur Blank has done typically, but I do wonder, given that Raheem isn't a first-time head coach like Arthur Smith was, or some of these guys, if he would consider after 2 years of no playoffs pulling the plug. I'm curious, like Aaron, what do you think? Do you think that Blank would consider like pulling the plug after 2 years on this, even though he's usually a 3-year type of guy?
Yeah, I think he would. I think when you look at the circumstances of why he fired Arthur Smith because he didn't make the playoffs. It's really that simple. And so the expectation this year was to make the playoffs. The Falcons were in prime position to do that. They obviously falconed and didn't do so. And so, again, I wouldn't sit here and say 100% if they don't make the playoffs, Raheem is fired. Obviously it depends on what are the circumstances that lead to the Falcons missing the playoffs, and that you may have extenuating circumstances, but I do know this fan base pretty well, and I certainly know the fan base will be calling for Raheem's dismissal if they miss the playoffs the second year. You already had a very vocal, I would say, minority of the fan base, but depending on what social media platform you look at, I'm sure if you look at Adnan Ikic's Twitter feed, he he might be at the front of that line of pushing for maybe Raheem being one and done. So that's only going to get louder if the Falcons miss the playoffs. And I think that will be enough potentially for Arthur Blank to, reverse his usual trend and pull the plug on Raheem Morris, especially, if we're sitting here looking at, hey, man, this offense is looking good, under Michael Penix in his first full year as a starter, and the defense still struggles. And then you're going to look at that and say, well, Raheem has botched 2 coordinator hires. And all. So again, it all depends on the circumstances. But I do feel like if I was betting, yes, if they miss the playoffs this upcoming season, then this will be Raheem Morris's last season in Atlanta.
Yeah. What do you think, Adnan? You think I'm pretty sure I know where you're leaning on this one, but what do you
If
think?
you follow me on Twitter, you already know my opinion on this entire ordeal.
Yep.
So, I'll be even more vocal if they miss the playoffs next year. I give you my word.
Yeah. No, I do think.
I will say if they miss due to, if it's like an extenuating circumstance, like Aaron said, that's that's different. It's a case by case basis. Like if half the roster is just hurt, they have me out there, as a defensive back, then that's slightly more forgivable.
Yeah. I mean, there's always some context involved. We're sort of just like assuming that it's a relatively normal season and they just underperform, I guess would be the assumption. But yeah, I do think that this is the leash is probably getting shorter, especially if I do think there's a non-zero chance that the offense is very good and Michael Penix looks legit and this all comes together, but the defense is still a big issue. The whole people have joked about it, but I think if the offense sort of takes flight and the defense holds the team back, I do think that Zach Robinson would get a legitimate opportunity to either be the interim head coach if they do move on from Raheem at some point during the season, or just to interview for the head coaching job, because I think they would really like to not lose him if the offense is playing at that level. So that is something to keep an eye on. But again, pretty far off possibility at this point. But
question. So let's say the team goes out there and wins, just enough to make the playoffs. 10 wins, whatever, 10-7. They get in through wild card, or maybe the NFC South is weak again. And they do it, let's say, off the offense, like Kevin says, takes off top 5 unit, and then the defense is just, sort of a disaster, and the team wins despite the defense, bottom 5 unit. Would you consider pulling the plug on Morris even though you made the playoffs and giving Zach Robinson the head coaching job?
I mean, I would consider it. I don't think many NFL teams would.
I don't think Blank would ever do that.
Yeah,
but, I'm
I'd
just
consider it.
hypothetical here. Because it sort of goes back to the conversation of 2017, right? Of the Kyle Shanahan, Dan Quinn. Obviously that team won through the back of the Kyle Shanahan offense. And then it's sort of obviously they were never going to fire Dan Quinn, but then hindsight being 2020, wouldn't you, if you can go back in time, wouldn't you have?
I mean, yeah, knowing what you know, you probably do.
Know
yes.
what you know now.
Yeah, for sure. But
well, the one team that kind of did this was the Bucs when they fired Lovie Smith so that they could promote Dirk Cutter as a head coach after his 1 year with Jameis Winston. Now, obviously, the Bucs didn't make the playoffs in that circumstance. They were 6-10 that year. But they're the one team that did it. So, I don't know if that's a template that people want to follow, but it is. We do have an example of a team basically saying we value the offensive coordinator more than we value the head coach, and so we're gonna.
Because in this scenario, I'm just spitballing. If Falcons do have that type of offense, I do think that Robinson would be a head coach somewhere, even if it's not Atlanta in that scenario.
Yeah, I do think what happened in 2016 makes it more likely. Blank lived through it, right? He lived through having an elite coordinator fall in your lap through another head coach, and that guy leaving and the team falling apart. So I do think there is a chance that if the defense and everything is sort of meh and the team is sort of meh, but the offense is great, and Zach Robinson's getting outside interest, that I think there's a non-zero chance that blank sort of says like, well, I'm not letting this happen again. We need to keep the guy that's going to, like, they obviously want the offense to be the engine. This team has always kind of been built that way, ever since Matt Ryan. And we hope, obviously, that we have a quarterback that's even approaching Matt Ryan's level and Mike Penix, and so far encouraging. A long way to go, though. And in that case, like, if you think you've hit on the quarterback, I do think there is a non-zero chance that they're like, okay, we need to secure this offensive system. If it, like, we've seen it work for 2 years or like a year and a half or whatever with Penix, like, we need to make sure that's in place. We can't afford to lose that. But that would be quite the rise for Zach Robinson, I'm not sure he'll get, like, unless the team is just like explode, like, so good next year. I don't know how serious like the interviews will be for Robinson, but it's definitely something to consider, because I would hate to have got our hands on another great coordinator and let them leave to keep another potentially not so great head coach. That's something the bridge we'll have to cross when we get to it. But I think there is like a narrow path where that it could happen, especially now that the Falcons have lived through it one time in recent history. We got K Tim 28 with the $50. Thank you so much, K. Really appreciate you. Says, longtime listener, appreciate all the coverage you guys do for our beloved team. Yeah, it's tough love right now, but yeah. Our front seven on defense needs to start passing the eye test. We need to get bigger and faster in those positions, especially the D-line. Yeah, I mean, I do think there's going to be an emphasis on the D-line in the draft. I would think like probably 1 to 2 of their 4 picks are going to be defensive line. But they also need secondary help and linebacker and all this other stuff. So, it's going to be hard to do. That kind of leads into our offseason conversation a little bit here. But yeah, I think the D-line is definitely something they're going to have to invest in, because probably having to cut bait with some of these veterans that are really costing them a ton of cap. But on the topic of the cap, I've been tweeting a lot and kind of try to inform people about the Kirk Cousins contract. So first of all, I don't know that he's going to be traded, right? I think it's possible, because the NFL is crazy for quarterbacks. I think if you look at it in a vacuum, you're like, why would anyone trade for this? We just saw him fall off a cliff. And you would be right to say that. But the fact of the matter is, NFL teams do dumb stuff. There's going to be teams that look at Kirk Cousins and be like, he had a 500-yard game. He was doing good early in the year. We think we can get something. Like, teams might think they can, and I don't think this is going to be plan A for anyone. Maybe the Browns. I don't know. Outside of the Browns, I don't think this is going to be plan A for anyone, but there could be a chance that a team is like, we lost our starter to injury or something went wrong, right? And they think they can sell the fans on Kirk can like get us through this year. I think that's the Falcons' best chance to move Kirk Cousins. They're not going to get any significant compensation. It's probably going to be a pick swap. The Falcons may need to take on some of that base salary. Like, I think they would consider taking on, the $2.5 million to make it cap neutral or whatever. That's probably the most they'd be willing to do. But I know some people think it's impossible. I get it. I think it's possible. But Aaron, I know you're more on the side of it might be impossible to move Kirk Cousins. Do you think they will just cut him? Or do you think they'll hold him and make him be the backup until they can make a more advantageous sort of split in 2026?
Well, I think, Kevin, you're right. There is a non-zero chance that the Falcons trade Kirk Cousins. Now, what that number is, I still think there's a 0 in front of that number, because it's in the single digits in terms of the odds of that trade coming to fruition. I think the biggest obstacle for the Falcons trading Kirk Cousins is going to be Kirk Cousins. Because you already heard that report from Ian Rappaport back in December when they benched Kirk Cousins that the Falcons were planning on cutting Kirk Cousins. And then, of course, Terry in his year-end press conference said there's no validity to that report. But you sit there and you go, okay, well, if Ian Rappaport didn't get that from the Atlanta Falcons, who in the world could he have possibly gotten that information from? Who is it that when all these NFL insiders are saying, my sources say, who are these sources? It may be the agent. And the agent of Kirk Cousins is a very good agent. He's basically given Kirk Cousins basically all the leverage in this situation, because the Falcons can sit there and say, hey, we're comfortable. Kirk's going to be our backup. We'll pay a $40 million backup. And Kirk Cousins will be like, nah, I ain't doing that. And then the Falcons are going to be like, I guess we got to hold you hostage for the next year and create a whole nightmare in the locker room of Kirk Cousins being this disgruntled player. And we know Kirk will speak his mind. He will let things slip that he thinks. Like, there is no deceptive bone in Kirk Cousins' body. If you ask him, did the Falcons tamper? He'll be like, maybe they tampered. Go investigate. Take a 5th round draft pick. So I sit there and I go, like, that's to me the main reason why I don't think it's going to happen, because basically Kirk and his agent have the power, and they basically can say, we're going to make it so that you cut us, and then we can basically pick our place, because that's basically what Kirk and his agent have done these last several years when they've done a great job negotiating contracts, because they have leverage, and they don't really have quite the same leverage. They do have some with a no trade clause, because they can basically veto any trade. But what you want to do, if you're the agent of Kirk Cousins and you want to maximize what could be maybe the last contract of him, you want him to be a free agent. The only way you can be a free agent is by getting the Falcons to cut him. So I don't think this is the last we've heard of the Kirk Cousins agent, sending out things to the Ian Rappaports and the Tom Pelisseros and the Diana Rossinis of the world, basically trying to force the Falcons' hands to cut him. And because of that, it's not going to be a secret among the other 31 NFL teams that the Falcons will eventually cut Kirk, and then they're going to have really no leverage in the negotiation. So that to me is the main reason why, I just don't think, even though there is a non-zero chance that maybe some team will basically decide that we're willing to pay Kirk Cousins $25 million, I think the opportunity to basically pull a Russell Wilson, and the Falcons pay $40 million to Kirk Cousins, and another team pays him veteran minimum sort of contract, is, we say that to me is like, again, if the chance of trading Kirk is a 2% chance, and there's a 98% chance that other outcome happens. And so that's why, I sit here and I go, like, it could happen, but I wouldn't hold my breath.
Also, the other big thing about it with Kirk Cousins that makes it way more advantageous for the Falcons to cut him is his contract. He gets a $10 million roster bonus for 2026 on the 5th league day of this year. So yeah, the Falcons can be petty, and the Falcons can hold Kirk Cousins hostage and all that stuff. But in doing so, they'll just hurt their cap even more in 2026. I kind of feel like the Falcons would rather, if it does come to that, and if you cannot trade him anywhere, which, let's be honest, probably won't be able to. Hopefully they will, but probably not. If that happens, then the Falcons, I think, would way rather just get his massive contract off the books and be completely done with this entire Kirk Cousins nightmare after a year of swallowing, the terrible dead cap this year, as opposed to, all right, well, we're swallowing the dead cap this year, and now we owe him another $10 million in 2026 as well.
Yeah, you already owe him $25 billion in dead money if you make him a post-June 1 cut next year, right? If you can't trade him. So you're going to change that to $35 million. So you're going to basically, the cap is going to go up. So $35 million is less than $40 million, but you're basically taking on a similar amount of dead money now 2 years removed from Kirk Cousins being on the team, as opposed. So I agree with Adnan. I just think eventually, and again, I think this will be much more clear when we get to the combine and when all the insiders are talking with all the teams and whatnot, and it'll be more obvious to folks then. Now we can sit here and do the fanfic and spend the next 8 weeks talking about all the different possibilities. But once we get to March, I think it will be very clear that basically the only path forward for the Falcons, or the path of least resistance, is just to cut bait and move on and go full form into the Michael Penix era.
Yeah, and there's a decent chance that they do cut him, right? Just because they don't want to deal with it. The reason it's a little bit different than like the Wilson deal and stuff like that is the Falcons actively gain nothing from cutting him, except for the roster bonus that you guys mentioned, right? The only money they save, even if they make him a post June 1st cut, they save no money, none at all. Obviously they would keep that roster bonus from hitting next year. But the way, if they do make him a post June 1st cut, they don't save any money this year. They do save quite a lot next year, obviously. But I think they saved like 35 mil roughly, something like that. So, that obviously is a lot. So really it's the calculus of, do we think we can trade him? And if we can, is it worth the risk of the $10 million? That's kind of the thing. It's like, because if they do cut him, then they need to find another backup quarterback too. So then you're paying him to not be your backup quarterback, and you have to go pay another backup quarterback. So I think that's where, to me, like the $10 million of savings next year is kind of a wash, because you're going to have to find another backup quarterback. You're not going to have a rookie contract guy backing up Mike Penix. I mean, they're not going to do that either. So, but yeah, they've definitely put themselves in a bad spot with this contract. But, part of me thinks that the way they set up 2025 to make it basically like we gain nothing from cutting him is so that they can play hardball with him, because they're like, look, we don't get anything from cutting you, Kirk Cousins. If we hold you, there's always the chance someone's going to come calling. And I think if they do hold Kirk Cousins until the start of the season, they will be able to trade him. I still don't think they're going to get anything for him, but I think they could move him, because something's going to happen. Someone's going to get hurt. Something's not going to go to plan. Someone's going to miss on their quarterback in the draft. Something's going to happen. I think if they're willing to hold him and risk the 10 million, they're because it's like you risk 10 million to save 27 and a half or whatever. So to me, it's like, oh, I think that's worth it. But will they think that? How big of a problem? I just don't believe Kirk Cousins is a locker room problem. Like, I think he can, like, he'll put on a mean face, and then he'll go in there and start, like, talking to Mike Penix's agent. He'll be like, stop it. What are you doing? Get out of there. And he'll be like, oh, sorry. Like, I really don't think Kirk is like that. Like, his agent will tell him to play hardball, but he's not really like that. So I don't think, and I think Kirk wants to start somewhere, right? So I don't know, but I don't know. Like, I think I think it would be good for the Falcons front office to play hardball and, like, show the NFL that they're not going to be bullied by Kirk's agent. But Kirk's agent has bullied a lot of teams, so it's not like they'd be the first,
including the Falcons with the contract. So
it's not like they'd be the first team to ever get bullied by Kirk Cousins' agent. But to me, I don't have any remorse about holding him. It's like, we're paying you $27.5 million in base to be our backup. So, like, I don't know why you're upset, Kirk. I mean, you're getting a huge paycheck that's fully guaranteed. So, I mean, if you want to start, you can greenlight a trade. But yeah, I don't know if they'll actually do that. But that's what I would do. I would play hardball and bank on chaos, because if there's one thing that the NFL is good at, it's chaos. And sooner or later, someone's going to need a quarterback. Sooner or later. But will they wait it out, or will they get bullied by the agent? Probably get bullied by the agent. I agree, that's more likely.
I mean, well, if you're a team going to acquire Kirk, it's like, we can trade for Kirk and pay him 25, or we can wait till the Falcons to cut him and pay him 2. And I feel like that's really going to be the thing that really prevents a trade from happening, because I think if it comes to the rest of the NFL calling, because it would be different if Kirk played well, right? Like, I don't think anybody's going to sit there and feel like we got to get Kirk Cousins is going to save our season. Like, the Falcons made that mistake, right? And it didn't work out. And I don't think any other team is going to be like, Kirk is going to save our season. Like, we talk about the Browns, like, they were the natural landing part, but guess what? They have the number 2 pick. And so if they like 2 quarterbacks in this draft class, then they're like, okay, because they're not going to be able to get rid of Deshaun Watson. So it's just going to be one of those situations where it's like, okay, well, we have our quarterback solution. So you're just, I guess you're hoping that the Giants at number 3 are just like screwed, and they're just like, screw it. Joe Shane, all in, got to save my job. Kirk Cousins, like, that's what you're hoping for. And it's like, okay, like, I guess, but like, I don't see it happening that way. So I think that's the issue, where it's like, ultimately all the other teams are just gonna be like, okay, Falcons, if you're going to keep a $40 million backup and handle that whole situation, be our guest, because we are not going to bend over backwards to go after Kirk Cousins at this stage in his career. So I think that's really what hurts the Falcons. So it's kind of a game of chicken, I guess, between Kirk, his agent, the other 31 NFL teams, and the Atlanta Falcons, and whoever blinks first, loses, wins, I don't know, whatever.
Everybody loses in this scenario.
Yeah.
But Yeah. I do think that if they don't cut him before the bonus kicks in, they're just going to hold him because at that point they have no reason at all to cut him. So that'll be the fascinating time is if he's still on the roster after that bonus guarantees, they're holding him. So, I'm very, very curious to see how they play it because again, I think it's like if you got the stones for it, you can probably snooker someone into trading for him eventually, but you're going to have to like poker face it out for like 6 months. And I don't know that this front office can handle that, but it would be cool if they did, but
we would have something to talk about.
That would be fascinating.
So it would be great content. I wouldn't be mad at it.
No. So I it is a fascinating discussion though. So I'm interested to see how it develops, and if we have clarity in March or not. So, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I remember this happened with Deion Jones. I had gotten good word from somebody in late May, early June that the Falcons were going to move on from Deion Jones, and they hung on to Deion Jones for 3 months, 4 months, whatever it was, till October before trading him. So it's not unprecedented for the Falcons. Now, there was a lot of factors in that. Deion Jones got hurt and all that stuff and all those things. But there is precedent for this regime basically holding a player hostage until they got a trade because they didn't want to cut a guy. So that is something to put out there.
Yeah. It would certainly, it's easy for me to say because I don't got to deal with any of the blowback if they can't trade him. But I just feel like Kirk Cousins can't be mean. He's too nice. He'll be like, oh, I'll be a dick in the locker room, and then he'll just show up and start chatting everybody up, and it's like, wait, no, sorry, yeah, you guys suck, yeah, just so it's gonna be fascinating, but yeah, more than likely it's gonna be the boring outcome where he just gets cut and the Falcons just eat the contract and get egg all over their face. But maybe there's a chance they could thread this needle. Maybe there's a chance. But how often have the Falcons threaded any needle? Very rarely, right? very, very, very rarely. So, but
threaded the needle of misery, plenty.
Yeah, they do that very well. They find a way for that.
Stabbed with a needle. Yeah, they stab themselves with the needle.
They definitely needle us incessantly. So, Adnan, anything you want to add about the Kirk Cousins situation?
Yeah, honestly, my preference at this point is just cut him, do away with that $10 million roster bonus. I don't think that they're gonna, wind up finding a trade partner. I think it's too risky at this point. Maybe it happens, and maybe the gamble pays off. But when's the last time the Falcons have gambled and it's paid off?
Right. Rarely, but hope springs eternal in the offseason, right? But no, it's the one that if they're gonna cut him, they will cut him post June 1st before the roster bonus guarantees. They will save nothing this year, but they will save $45 million in 2026. So, that will be helpful. That will be somewhat helpful. Well, it's not exactly $45 million. That's like the total savings, but it'll be split between 2 years. So they save a lot. They save a lot. That'll help. But they're basically nothing they do. Even trading Cousins doesn't really help their cap this year. Like I think the nice thing about trading him would be that you get all of the deal off your books this year, and you could save like theoretically like a couple million, and it's all gone. But again, unlikely. We'll see how that plays out. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for joining us and hanging out. We appreciate you guys. Very interesting offseason ahead. Gonna do like a full show about the Cousins contract situation, talk about some of the stuff we just covered. Also going to do probably a short one on the Kyle Pitts situation because I know that's a hot button topic too. And the short answer is I don't know why people think the Falcons can't trade Kyle Pitts. I think Falcons fans hate Kyle Pitts more than anybody else. There's definitely teams that will trade a day 2 pick for Kyle Pitts, but what day 2 pick, how good it'll be, all that I don't know, but I guarantee you someone will trade for Kyle Pitts if they want to trade him. Do they want to trade him? That I don't know either. This team is weird. So we'll talk more about that, talk about the rest of this offseason. And of course, Senior Bowl coming up just a couple weeks. We'll have all those draft takes for you. I'll have the first mock draft coming out soon. I know Aaron will be down there. in Mobile. Trayshawn will be down in Mobile too. Trayshawn's coming back from his vacay later this week, so we'll have, I think, a Tuesday takes for you guys next week. Yeah, but really appreciate my guests. First of all, Aaron Freeman at Locked On Falcons. Aaron, thanks again for coming on. Anything else you're working on you'd like to let the people know about?
Yeah, I'm doing some Senior Bowl prep. I'll probably have a couple of write-ups in the next couple of weeks about some of the pass rushers available down in Mobile in a couple of weeks over at the Falcoholic. I just did an episode on Locked On Falcons. You can watch on YouTube right now that talks about all the things that Zach Robinson needs to do in order to improve this offense so that we can have that top 5 offense, and then contemplate whether or not we should promote him as the head coach next year after the Falcons inevitably disappoint us. And I will also be talking about Kyle Pitts probably tomorrow on Locked On Falcons as well. So going to do some positional reviews next week on the podcast. So we'll be looking at, the offense and who played well and who didn't. So all that stuff and more. So we're fully in off-season mode on Locked On Falcons. So check it out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, definitely check that out, guys. Lots of interesting stuff. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about Kyle Pitts. And of course, with us as well, my co-host Adnan Ikic. He's at Say Which Way. Adnan, anything else you're working on you'd like to let people know about?
Yeah, I'm going to plug the Falcoholic.com. I've been doing fantasy stud and dud all season long. I'm going to get to it soon, but I do a year-end article to wrap that series up. Been doing it for like 4 or 5 years at this point, so it'll be nice for to do it. Put a bow on top of that article series, and yeah, that'll be coming out probably soonish. But yeah, other than that, just Falcoholic.com, one-stop shop for all of your written content. We will be staying on top of everything regarding, the defensive coordinator search. And of course, when free agency opens up, we'll be writing any and all articles you can ask for regarding analysis, regarding breaking news, regarding any signings. Yeah. So, if you don't know about the Falcoholic.com and you're here somehow, then I'm kind of impressed, and I would love to hear how you got here.
Just my charisma alone drew them in. That's the only explanation, I guess. But thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Really appreciate that. Leave your comments. Love to hear from you guys. Check out the Patreon if you want to support the show. Check out the channel memberships if you're more of a video enjoyer. We will have lots more off-season content coming your guys' way real soon. Thanks again to everyone for donating to the Senior Bowl Fund. You can always donate offline too. Just make sure you leave your comment with it, and we will read it on the next show. If you prefer Venmo and stuff like that, that's in my Twitter profile. Thanks again to everyone who already has donated. Really appreciate that stuff. We'll have lots great stuff coming your way, guys. Check out the Falcoholic.com as well. Like Adnan said, great stuff there all the time. So once again, thanks for joining us, guys, tonight on the Falcoholic Live. We will be back real soon with more Falcons content. Until then, have a great night, folks. Thanks again to BetOnline for sponsoring